The American journalist asks a question. Brigitte Bardot stops speaking mid-answer, sets down her glass, and looks directly at him without blinking. The Hotel George V suite goes quiet except for the hum of the photographer's lights. 90 seconds of silence will follow, and by the end of it, 17 prepared questions will remain unasked. Earlier that afternoon, the journalist arrived at the Hotel George V 40 minutes early. He checked in at the lobby desk, confirmed the suite number with the concierge, and took the elevator to the fourth floor. The photographer was already there, unloading equipment from two large cases in the hallway outside the suite door. They were given access 30 minutes before the scheduled interview time. The publicists arranged it this way: time to set up lights, to position chairs, to control the visual frame before she arrives. The photographer works quickly, testing angles and checking the afternoon light coming through the windows. The suite faces the Avenue George V. The furniture has been rearranged slightly, a chair positioned by the window for her, another chair across from it for the journalist. The photographer sets up two lights on stands, one near the door, one angled from the corner. He takes test shots of the empty chair. The journalist opens his notebook to the page of prepared questions, 20 of them, numbered, researched. His editor briefed him before he left New York. This is a career profile for the entertainment section, but the angle is her image, her impact, her cultural moment. The questions were approved by the editor before the flight to Paris. She arrives exactly on time. No entourage, no assistant, just her, walking into the suite in a simple dress, carrying only a small purse. The photographer straightens from adjusting his equipment. The journalist stands from his chair. She greets them both briefly, in English. Her accent is noticeable, but her English is clear. She sits in the chair by the window without being directed to it. The photographer checks his light meter one more time. The room has 3 people in it. Bardot sits in the chair by the window, afternoon light filtering through the sheer curtains behind her. The journalist sits across from her with his notebook open to a page of prepared questions, numbered 1 through 20. The photographer stands near the door, adjusting his equipment between shots, checking light meters and angles. The studio publicists arranged this interview with strict instructions. She must cooperate. She must be charming. She must give the American magazine what they came for. This is part of the arrangement, the cost of international distribution, the price of American box office success. The American magazine promised a career profile. They sent a journalist with credentials from their entertainment division and a photographer with professional equipment, but the journalist arrived with questions that had nothing to do with her work. His notebook doesn't contain questions about her performances or her directors or her approach to character. He wants to know about her body, about her relationships, about her willingness to justify why she exists on screen the way she does. The questions were written before he arrived in Paris. The first question was about her sex symbol status. She answered it. Her voice was polite, but her answer was brief, less than 2 sentences. She picked up her glass and took a sip of water. The journalist writes down her response in his shorthand. His pen moves quickly across the page. He's already formulating his next question before she finishes speaking, already moving to the second item on his list. The photographer captures the moment. Her hand on the glass, her face in profile against the window light. The shutter clicks 3 times in rapid succession. She doesn't react to the sound. The second question was about her provocative roles. She answered that one too. Her response was even shorter than the first. She set the glass back down on the side table next to her chair. This time, the pause before she speaks is longer, a beat of silence while she considers the question. The journalist notices but doesn't adjust his approach. He's following the list, the structure, the plan he arrived with. The photographer moves slightly to his left, trying to capture a different angle. The floorboard creaks under his weight. Bardot's eyes flick toward the sound, then back to the journalist. Each answer she gives becomes more clipped than the one before. The journalist writes down her responses, but he's already moving to his next question before she finishes speaking. His pen moves across the page in shorthand. The photographer adjusts his position, waiting for the right moment to capture her expression. The journalist checks his list. Question 3. He's been preparing this one, knowing it's more direct than the first 2. He believes this is where the real story begins. Her response to the accusation embedded in the question, her defense, or justification, or explanation. He glances up at her. She's looking at him, waiting. He reads the question from his notebook. The third question comes without pause. He asks her to explain why she uses her body to advance her career. The phrasing isn't subtle. It isn't a question. It's an accusation with a question mark at the end. The photographer's finger hovers over the shutter button. She stops speaking mid-sentence, sets down the glass she was holding. Her hand doesn't shake when she places it on the side table. The glass makes a soft sound against the wood. Then she looks at him, direct eye contact, completely still. Her posture doesn't change. Her expression doesn't harden or soften. She simply stops performing the role of the cooperative interview subject. The journalist waits for her to finish her answer. She doesn't finish it. She doesn't speak at all. His pen is still touching the page, ready to write. He expected pushback. He expected defensiveness or anger or a carefully constructed explanation. He expected words. His entire professional training is built around managing responses to difficult questions, how to probe further, how to soften, how to redirect. But she isn't responding. She's just looking at him, and he has no training for this. The silence extends. The photographer glances up from his camera, sensing something has shifted in the room. The journalist shifts slightly in his chair, pen still poised above the page. He clears his throat quietly, a sound meant to prompt her to continue. She hasn't moved. Her gaze stays fixed on the journalist. Not aggressive, not confrontational, simply present. The only sound in the room is the hum of the lights and the distant traffic noise from the Avenue George V below. The journalist's training tells him to wait, to let the silence work. Subjects fill silences. They become uncomfortable. They explain. They offer more than they intended. This is basic interview technique. He knows how to use silence. But this silence is different. It isn't the silence of someone gathering thoughts or choosing words carefully. It's the silence of someone who has decided the conversation is over. The photographer lowers his camera slowly, as if sudden movement might break whatever is happening. The journalist looks down at his notebook, then back up at her. He opens his mouth slightly, as if to rephrase the question, then closes it. The photographer has been shooting interviews for 12 years. He's seen arguments, walkouts, tears, anger. He's never seen this. Someone sitting completely still, saying nothing, while a journalist's entire approach collapses in real time. He takes one photograph of the moment, not because it will be published. He already knows it won't, but because he recognizes he's witnessing something unusual. The shutter sound is loud in the silent room. She still hasn't spoken. She hasn't looked away. She hasn't filled the silence with explanations or apologies or defensive justifications. The silence is becoming its own presence in the room. The journalist's pen is still in his hand, but it isn't moving across the page anymore. He glances at his list of questions, then back at her. The room feels smaller than it did when he asked the question. The air feels different. He considers his options. He could apologize, rephrase, move to question 4. He could acknowledge the line he crossed. He could try to salvage the interview. These options move through his mind in sequence. But something in her gaze tells him none of these options will work. This isn't a negotiation. She's made a decision, and she isn't interested in his attempts to undo it. The photographer takes a step back from his position. The movement is careful, deliberate, like someone leaving a room where something fragile is happening. His equipment bag is still open on the floor, but he doesn't reach for another lens. The silence has weight now. It fills the space between them. The journalist breaks eye contact first and looks down at his prepared questions. His shoulders drop slightly. He taps his pen against the notebook once, then stops. The publicists are in a different suite, 3 floors down, expecting this interview to take 90 minutes. They have another appointment scheduled for her after this. A radio interview, then a photo shoot for Paris Match. The schedule is typed on a card in her purse. 90 seconds have passed since his third question. The journalist closes his notebook. The sound of the cover meeting the pages is the first sound anyone has made. It echoes slightly in the quiet room. He doesn't ask question 4. He has 17 more questions on his list about her dating life, her exercise routine, her diet, her beauty secrets, her measurements, her thoughts on marriage. He doesn't ask any of them. The photographer begins packing his equipment. He unplugs the lights and the room's natural afternoon light takes over. He wraps the cords carefully, methodically, places the camera carefully in its case, checking the lens before closing it. No one has instructed him to pack up. Bardot remains in the chair by the window. She never broke the silence. She never left the room. She never said another word after his third question ended. Her hands are folded in her lap now, relaxed. The journalist stands, picks up his notebook and his coat from the chair beside him. The photographer is already at the door with his equipment, both hands full. He uses his shoulder to open it. They leave the Hotel George 5 suite. She doesn't walk them out. She doesn't stand. She remains seated in the chair, looking at the space where the journalist was sitting. The door closes quietly behind them. In the hallway, the journalist and photographer don't speak. They walk to the elevator in silence. The journalist holds his notebook against his chest. Inside are 3 answers and 17 unanswered questions. The elevator arrives. They step inside. The photographer sets down one of his equipment cases to press the button for the lobby. The doors close. In the descending elevator, the journalist opens his notebook and looks at the page. 3 short answers written in his shorthand. Question 4 circled but never asked. He closes the notebook again. The photographer watches the floor numbers descend. He's thinking about the photograph he took during the silence, the one of her sitting completely still while the journalist waited for an answer that never came. He doesn't mention it to the journalist. They exit the elevator and walk through the Hotel George 5 lobby, past the concierge desk, past the leather chairs where guests sit reading newspapers, out onto the Avenue George 5 where taxis wait in a line along the curb. The journalist thanks the photographer, says he'll be in touch about the story. Both of them know there won't be a story. The photographer nods and hails a taxi to take him back to his studio on the left bank. The journalist walks. He doesn't know where he's walking. He just needs to move. The notebook is still in his hand. After 2 blocks, he stops at a cafe and orders coffee he doesn't drink. The interview was never published. The magazine ran a different story that month, a piece about Italian cinema, something else their Paris correspondent had filed weeks earlier. But the journalist told the story anyway, to other reporters, to editors, to colleagues who asked why he came back from Paris without a story. He told them about the woman who stopped answering questions, about silence that felt longer than any interview he'd ever conducted, about forgetting 17 prepared questions because she refused to answer the 3rd one, about the way her stillness made him close his own notebook. She never raised her voice, never asked him to leave, never explained herself or defended her choices. She just looked at him. That was the part he kept returning to when he told the story, the directness of her gaze, the absence of apology in it. The story spread among American journalists covering European cinema, not as gossip, as something else, a warning about what happens when you mistake access for permission. Some journalists who heard it began revising their prepared questions before interviews. Others dismissed it as exaggeration. But the photographer told the same story, about the moment he lowered his camera because there was nothing to photograph anymore, about packing up his equipment in a silent room while a woman sat completely still in a chair by the window. The publicists heard about it later that day. They called her suite to ask what happened. She told them the interview ended early. They asked if there was a problem. She said no. There was no problem. The interview simply ended. What happened in the Hotel George 5 suite wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no argument, no scene, just a woman who decided she was done answering questions that weren't really questions, just a silence that lasted 90 seconds and changed the shape of the afternoon. And a room that changed the moment she made that decision. This story is a historically inspired dramatization based on documented accounts of Bardot's contentious relationships with international press during the late 1950s. Specific dialogue and private room dynamics are creative interpretations.